I'm a bit confused at the moment. A judge from Wisconsin named Hannah Dugan was arrested this week after helping an illegal immigrant evade ICE by allowing him to use the back door in her courtroom to run away. Democrats are up in arms about this, yelling about a constitutional crisis and how Donald Trump is undermining the independence of the judiciary through his intimidation tactics. I guess I should take a minute to remind them that no one is above the law. If that phrase doesn't sound familiar, just remember it's the same rationale that was given to us for the last 4 years when Democrats arrested Donald Trump and charged him with 11 million felonies for every imagined crime under the sun. So forgive me if I say your outrage falls on deaf ears and your hypocrisy is just amusing. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So I have a couple important topics for you today. Two important topics on the agenda. And then also, as a bonus, one nonsense topic, which is going to be kind of fun. So we're going to talk about the rash of judges that simply seem to think that it's their job to be above the law. They get to dictate the law in a way that we've never seen before, like the Old West. And we're going to talk about, in topic two, we're going to talk about the state of shipping in the United States, our ports, the health, the amount of cargo coming in and out, all that fun stuff that we've been talking about for a couple weeks. And then for some nonsense, could 100 men beat one gorilla in a fight? You'll find out at the end. Anyway, but first, our favorite comment from last week. This comes from Kaz, my N, Johannes 5163. I don't know if maybe there's some mispronunciation in there. Kaz, my N, Johannes, Mayan Johannes 5163, who just said best take in talking about my RFK reel from last week. And Kaz, I just want to say, I know it. It's sometimes my takes are just very good, but most of the time best is really the only word that can describe them. So I just want to appreciate you for noticing because, some people just don't. And it takes a real shrewd observer of politics to understand that I'm just always right about everything. So appreciate you for noticing. Now, let's move on to topic one. These out of control judges. So this case, the big case that we talked about in the intro, I wanted to go over some specifics first, and then once we get through the specifics, we will talk about the broader implications going on nationwide. So, first, on April 18th, there was an illegal immigrant. His name was Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who was in court for a criminal hearing. This is in Wisconsin. The judge in this case is a woman named Hannah Dugan. And I guess during the court proceedings, it became apparent that officers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement were present in the courthouse, in her courtroom, with a warrant to arrest Ruiz. So, according to witnesses, and this was reported in a couple different places, Judge Dugan was informed by her clerk that ICE was, in fact, in the building. She became visibly angry, said something about this being absurd. She then left the courtroom, went to her chambers, and then went out to confront ICE and basically told them that it was inappropriate, it was against court proceedings to arrest people in courtrooms, and they were going to need to go through the chief judge for their warrant. So she then escorted them to the chief judge, and then after redirecting ICE away from her courtroom, Dugan went back into court and then escorted Ruiz and his attorney out of the courtroom through a non-public jury door. Now, and this is in a blatant attempt to evade ICE. Only deputies of the court, juries, court staff, and in-custody defendants go through this door. This is not a public access door. That's why it's called a non-public door. People do not come in and out of this door. And so she attempted to do this blatantly to evade ICE capture. The defendant, Ruiz, who was escorted out of the door, he left, but was apprehended after a brief foot chase. ICE got him. So then about a week goes by, and Dugan is arrested by the FBI on 25 April and released on her own recognizance. Okay, so that's kind of the story up to this point. A judge blatantly tried to help a person who had a warrant for his arrest evade capture, and she was arrested for it. The Democrats are very upset about this because they believe that this is Donald Trump trying to attack and intimidate the judicial branch of government. So as we all know, quick civics refresher here, we have three branches of government, three co-equal branches of government, meaning by the word co-equal, meaning that one is not above the other. One doesn't get to dictate to the other. What it is a series of checks and balances that allows the three branches to not operate with impunity, but to have other branches that can check them. So, for example, the executive is put in check by the judiciary because the executive might make laws or sign laws or bills into law, and then they're sued. It is adjudicated in the federal courts, and the Supreme Court might decide that actually this is not constitutional. This is what happens, for example, with Joe Biden's vax mandate that he tried to force on 100 million Americans. The Supreme Court said, actually, you can't just go through OSHA to invent this ruling that says everyone has to get a vaccine. And the Supreme Court said, this is unconstitutional, shot it down. Same thing with the student loan forgiveness under Biden. And a lot of this stuff has been, with Donald Trump, has gone through the courts. But anyway, so the judiciary is not above the executive branch. They don't get to just make policy, for example. That is not the role of the judges. That's not the role of the courts. That is actually the role of the legislature. They make laws. That's what their job is. They make laws. The president signs laws into action. The judiciary is designed to just let them know whether or not those laws are legal. That's kind of the way that the system works. Now, judges, because they don't get to dictate policy, and they also don't get to decide, and I know it's going to sound ridiculous, but they also don't get to decide what laws to uphold once they are laws. If that law is deemed constitutional, then they're not above the law in any real sense of the word. I'm not joking when I say that. I do believe no one is above the law. They shouldn't be. If our system is supposed to be impartial, Lady Justice is supposed to be blind, then no one is above the law. You're not allowed to commit crimes, even if you're a judge. And obstructing federal officers is a crime. Helping a person with a warrant to evade capture is aiding and abetting. That is a crime. If you knowingly do this, it's not like someone knocks on my door, says, hey, I crashed my car. I need a place to rest, and hopefully, can I use your phone to call someone? I say, yes. I let this person in my house. It turns out they robbed a bank. The police show up. They arrest the guy. Well, I'm not aiding and abetting, because if I have no knowledge of the crime, and I really can't just plead ignorance. I didn't know this person. They just showed up. I tell the story. That's not a crime. But if the person knocks on my door and says, hey, I just robbed a bank. I'll give you a cut. You can have my 10 grand if I could just come in and lay low in your basement. That's aiding and abetting. I knowingly participated in a crime because it's a crime to harbor a fugitive. So this person did that. Hannah Dugan, this Judge Dugan, did this. That's exactly what is alleged in this warrant for her arrest that was issued. It basically states that she knowingly attempted to help a fugitive evade capture from federal law enforcement. This is a crime. It's not an attack on the judicial system. It actually strengthens the judicial system when people commit crimes and they go to jail. They're not above the law. You do not get to decide just because you're an important person, you're a judge, or you're a politician, that you get to commit crimes and evade jail. That's just not the way it works. I'm actually one of the few people who thinks it's a good idea that some of our politicians should go to jail. That guy, what is he, from New Jersey? What's his last name? Mendoza? I can't remember now off the top of my head. I'm blanking on his name. But the corruption scandal that was going on, I believe he's from New Jersey. He should go to prison. If you're a politician and you are self-enriching by accepting bribes or allowing people to lavish gifts on you, I think this is a jailable offense. The reason why the last 4 years have been frustrating for me is because the people who have perverted and made the judicial system worse have been the Democrats. And it really bothers me. This whole attack against Donald Trump really has bothered me because you don't get to just make up crimes. Now, Alvin Bragg made up a crime. No one's ever been charged for it before. It's not because no president's ever been charged. It's because the crime doesn't really exist in the way that he's trying to to perpetrate it or act like Donald Trump perpetrated it. And so he just made this up. Letitia James, same things, made up a crime to go after Donald Trump. This is terrible. Fannie Willis in Georgia. These crimes should never, ever, ever have been allowed to proceed to trials. They should have been dismissed with prejudice by judges, but judges and lawyers and these DAs in different counties have made the justice system worse for the country by doing this. Donald Trump, and by the way, here's controversial take right here. If you are going to be serious about classified documents, which is the realest thing that Donald Trump did, he mishandled classified documents. You could make that case. I saw Jack Smith making the case. You could make the case. You also have to come out and be honest and say, if you're going to prosecute Donald Trump for this crime, we should have prosecuted Hillary Clinton for this crime. We should prosecute Joe Biden for this crime. We should get serious about policing classified documents. Because if you're a low-level person, if you're just in the military and you mishandle classified documents, if you're some master sergeant or a corporal or a captain and you have access to some classified briefing and you drop it in a parking lot and someone gets it and it's got your name on it, that's a big deal. You can be dismissed from the military. You could go to jail for these kind of things. Okay, if that's true, I'm in agreeing with you. If you think Donald Trump did something so egregious that he should have been jailed for mishandling classified documents, then you also have to be intellectually honest and say we should have done the same thing to Hillary Clinton. We should do the same thing to Joe Biden. And I'm not arguing with you because as I'm saying here, everyone under the law should be treated equally. That goes to the president. The president has some leeway because of his position. For example, I can't order a drone strike on some guy I don't like in Yemen because I don't like him. I can't do that. That's murder when I do it. It's a jailable offense. I'm not allowed to kill people even across the world. The president has some leeway. He's allowed to drone strike people in Yemen who are terrorists who are going against the United States. So it's a little different in that regard. But my point is that everyone really has to be treated the same. It doesn't matter if you're a judge. It doesn't matter if you're a politician. It doesn't matter if you're a regular Joe Schmo off the couch. The law is the law. This judge, Dugan, broke the law. I don't think anyone is trying to deny that. So I don't understand the defense. I don't understand the outrage. When you say this woman tried to break the law, aiding and abetting is a crime. I think we all agree that's a good crime. It's not a crime without merit. It's not Alvin Bragg making up charges that no one's ever been charged with. People get charged with aiding and abetting. You're not allowed to harbor fugitives. You're not allowed to do it. Everyone agrees that's a good crime. Shouldn't be allowed to. She did that. Are we in agreement that she did that, or is there some disagreement about her actions? Because as far as I'm aware, this story is not disputed. This is the story as it happened. I'm not hearing Dugan say, well, I didn't do that. He followed me in there and ran away before I could stop him. I haven't heard that defense. Now, obviously, it hasn't gone to trial. Obviously, so far, it seems like she has been withholding comment, both her lawyers and her. So we'll see. Maybe the story is mistaken. But if the story is the story as it's been reported, as multiple witnesses have attested to, then I think that she's going to jail. She should be disbarred. You're not allowed to break the law as a judge. That should be clear. Day 1, point 1 in the judge's handbook, you have to obey the law or you don't get to be a judge. So I don't understand. I don't know why judges are acting like they have the power to just choose what they want to do. And this goes to, when we're talking about co-equal branches of government, this goes to judges in general. Because it's been incredibly frustrating to watch Joe Biden let in millions and millions of illegal immigrants, blatantly violating the law by ignoring his duty to the Constitution, which says that he has to defend the border. That's the role of the executive branch as defined in Article 2 of the Constitution. It's the president's job to police the border and make it safe. Joe Biden blatantly ignored this, and millions of people poured in. And judges said nothing. They didn't say, Joe Biden, you have to enforce the border. But now that Donald Trump is trying to police the border, he's trying to deport illegal immigrants, you're seeing judges across the country issue injunctions and fight Donald Trump and issue these stops to entire national policy. You'll have some district judge in Washington, D.C. dictating policy for an entire country's worth of people. This is not the way the judiciary is supposed to work. It's not supposed to be supreme over the executive. I think that lower courts ordering nationwide injunctions on executive policy is a ridiculous thing. I don't know why we allow that to be the case. You shouldn't have some incredible, and I'm going to say this for both sides, you shouldn't have some incredibly liberal judge in D.C. or some incredibly conservative judge in Texas dictating nationwide policy. That is the job of the executive. It's your job to rule whether laws are or are not constitutional as a judge, or if you're in a criminal case, to rule guilt versus innocence, or if you're in a civil case, to rule who's liable for what. That's your job. It's not to dictate policy to the entire country's worth of people. You are the idea. The Supreme Court is the ultimate say, not some district court judge. If he hasn't a thing, he should be able to make an opinion, make a ruling, recommend rulings to the higher court, but the higher court is the one. So, for example, just to highlight the process, we go through an appellate court in D.C., some district judge who issues an injunction or would say, I recommend an injunction. I think that this policy violates whatever law, whatever statute. I think it goes against the Constitution. Here's my rationale. He writes an opinion. Well, that opinion should be moved to the top of the Supreme Court docket if it's a large case that affects a large thing. So this immigration issues, these are big executive cases. If the federal government is the person liable, then it should go to the top of the docket if that judge rules in favor against the federal executive. So that may have been kind of confusing. If the federal executive branch, if the president, let's just say the president, if the president loses in court, then the lawsuit that the president lost at the district or appellate level should be elevated to the top of the Supreme Court's priority list. That's a much clearer way to say that. The Supreme Court should then have to rule on it because a district or appellate judge or whoever in any of these district courts, they do not have the power of the Supreme Court to rule on the constitutional viability of any particular action taken by the executive. They can make recommendations, but these national injunctions, my goodness, that word did not want to come out, are ridiculous. And I think they themselves are kind of unconstitutional. I don't see that power outlined in the Constitution. I think that the judiciary just granted themselves the power to dictate policy. And I don't know where it says in Article 3, which has to deal with the Supreme Court, Article 3 of the Constitution, I don't know where it grants them that power. Anyway, my point is, judges have been acting in a way that undermines the courts more than an arrest of a judge who's breaking the law does. I do not understand that. By the way, this guy, this Ruiz, he was in court for beating a guy and hitting two separate women in an incident where he was arrested. One of the man he was fighting and one of the women, they went to the hospital. I don't know if they were hospitalized. I don't know if they stayed, but they both had to be treated at the hospital. One woman, it just said he accidentally elbowed her in the face in the melee. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but he assaulted three people. He battered three people, two of which had to go to the hospital. And he was also deported in the past. He was deported in 2013, and he snuck in again. This is the guy that Democrats are trying to defend. This is not the guy who, and believe me, I'm not saying anything bad about this person. The guy who's at Home Depot, who wants to come and put up a roof and wants to send money back to his kids who live in, I don't know, Guadalajara, that guy, I'm not upset with that guy. But that's not who Donald Trump is trying to deport. Top of the priority list. It is the guys like Ruiz who are criminals, first of all. He's under arrest. He's in a criminal court of law because he seems like he's guilty of a crime of battery, assault and battery. And so that's not the person you want to defend. Let's talk about the Democrats just seem to pick the worst candidates to feel sympathetic for. That guy who's been in the news, the Maryland dad, Abrego Garcia. You have a sitting senator of the United States who flies down to El Salvador to go on a lunch date with a man who is a domestic abuser and who was pulled over by the police driving a car that belonged to a man who later confessed of human trafficking. He was driving a car, had 8 people in it. The police made a report. They said, this guy seems like a trafficker. The guy who the car was registered to actually later confessed to human trafficking, moving people from one place to another in forced prostitution and terrible circumstances. The guy with the knuckle tattoos that have MS-13 gang symbols on them. People are saying it was a fake news story because the Trump administration put out a picture of his fist and they had the letters MS-13 on this superimposed. And they said, those aren't really tattoos. They were labels to understand the symbols. He has, whatever it was, a marijuana leaf, which is the M, and a skull, which is the S, and then a cross, which is the 1. It's like he had the MS-13 hand symbols tattooed on his knuckles, and they were labeling it so you understood what you were looking at, because it just looks like a marijuana leaf, a skull, a cross, and I can't remember what the 3 was. But my point is, you're having MS-13, wife-beating, human trafficker, and a sitting senator flies down there, holds hands, and cries with this guy, over his Pinot in his picnic spread. It's like, this is not the guy you want to be sympathetic towards. No one feels bad for the human trafficking, wife-beating gang member. But that's who Democrats pick. The Ruiz, this guy, assaults 3 people. He's in a criminal court. Most people I know have never had to go to criminal court. They've never been arrested. So why are you picking the guy who's in jail for assault, who's in jail for battery, who's in jail for human trafficking or any of these? Why is this the guy that you're picking? You just pick losers. And it makes no sense to me. And this comes on the heel of another judge. His last name, what was his name? Judge Joel Cano. Joel Cano, who was charged with harboring alleged gang members. He and his wife were both arrested, and they seem like they're guilty as hell. It sounded like he admits to destroying a phone that belonged to the guy, the Venezuelan gang member he was harboring, because it had pictures that would be incriminating. And he was protecting a guy. His last name was Ortega Lopez. And Lopez was all over social media, flashing pistols, shooting guns. He showcased gang tattoos. He's throwing up gang signs. This is not the guy that you want to use as an example to get behind or protect or go to jail for. Judge Dugan is going to jail for a man who beats women. This Judge Joel Cano, is going to jail for a gang member from Venezuela who shoots guns and had pictures of decapitated people on his social media website. It's ridiculous, and I don't understand the idea. I don't understand why these are the guys that you want to defend. Again, if you find the person who's worked in a hotel, who's a cleaning lady, and one of those, the typical story of a low-income person sneaking across the border to work. So you're talking low-skilled labor. Cleaning lady or a nanny or a roofer. Not that roofers necessarily the same as low skilled, but these guys who are working under the table for money. If you're highlighting those guys, again, you're going to find people who are more sympathetic towards that. I think there's an argument that it's a bad idea to allow illegal immigrants to do jobs because of the effects on the economy, but that's not the point that I'm trying to make right now. The point is, those people can be sympathetic. The people I'm describing in that scenario, those are sympathetic people. Why are you picking the gang members? Why are you picking the women beaters? Why are you picking these people that Donald Trump's deporting? And the reality is because Donald Trump is starting with those people who are gang members. And so all these deportations that you're seeing, most of which they went through criminal records first, and they found people who are criminals, and they're deporting those people to El Salvador. That's why that's happening the way it is. It's not because ICE rolled up with a van to Home Depot to pick out the guys who are trying to roof. I'm not saying that some of those hardworking people haven't been deported. What I'm saying is you are using the worst examples in the world to make your point. It's just terrible politics. Not that I'm trying to give advice to Democrats out there, but it's terrible politics to pick the poster boys that you're going to jail for, the poster boys that you're flying to El Salvador for, again, a sitting senator. What's his name? Chris something from Maryland. Like, what are you doing? It's just a terrible look. And so, I don't want to give advice, but use better examples. Pick better people to stand up for. You don't want to stand up for MS-13. You don't want to stand up for whatever that other Venezuelan gang is, whatever it is. But it's like not that. Anything else. Do anything else. Anyway, before I rant too much. Okay, let's move on to topic 2. The state of U.S. ports. And I know before I even get into this, I know people in the comments are going to tell me to keep the faith. I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, trust me out there. Donald Trump knows what he's doing. And believe me when I say I want Donald Trump to succeed. I think it's important. I think if this Republican administration, I think if it falters, if the economy tanks, then Democrats are going to win. And the people I'm looking at on the other side are AOC and Bernie Sanders. The ascendant wing of the Democratic Party is the Democratic Progressive Socialists. That's who are poised to win elections. So if the Republicans fail, it's going to turn into populism, but a left-leaning populism, which is going to wind up being democratic socialism. And we don't want to see that in the United States. So I want Donald Trump to succeed. However, I am going to tell you the truth as I see it in regards to these tariffs. I'm just going to go over some numbers here. Don't argue with me. Argue with these numbers. So cargo ships from China to the U.S. fell 60% in April compared to March. So it's a 60% drop-off March to April. 25% of all the cargo that comes into the East Coast arrives from China. So 1/4 of everything that we ship that arrives in, you're talking New York, Georgia, Florida, all the big ports along the eastern seaboard, they arrive from China. 45% of the Los Angeles port, which I believe, I don't want to say this without actually knowing. I thought it might be the biggest port in the country. I'm not 100% sure on that. I could be totally off. But for some reason, that rang in my head that's true. 45% of all of the cargo that comes into Los Angeles is from China. In April, you had 80 canceled sailings from China to the U.S. This is 60% more than during any month of COVID. And so the last 4 years before this, that's a 60% more cancellations than any. I think they're saying that you never even had 40. Now we've had 80. So these tariffs, while they couldn't hurt China, are going to have some negative impacts in the U.S. They are going to raise U.S. consumer prices. There is just no way around that. That's kind of always been built in, and Donald Trump has acknowledged as much. They are going to raise prices in the U.S. This could still be a win. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Short-term price raises are fine, depending on what the goal is long-term. And we are at a point right now where we're getting ready to dip. The economy is getting ready to dip, and Donald Trump has to make some moves to make sure that the dip is a blip. It doesn't wind up being a big thing. It's going to be a blip, and then we're going to go right back up. And there's ways to do it, but you have to get your priorities in order. So, for example, I think that this whole trade deficit war with the world thing is a waste of time. What you should do is reorient the goal, because you can still get a win out of these tariffs if you reorient the goal to minimizing the influence of China around the globe. You can do that. As the president of the United States, Donald Trump has the power to go at China harder than anyone in the world possibly could. So, how do you do it? The tariffs that Donald Trump put on people around the globe, this 10% baseline tariff and all these other tariffs that we've talked about, what you should do is go to each individual country, talk to Vietnam, talk to Malaysia, talk to all the countries around the world and say, listen, we like you, Vietnam. We like you, Malaysia. We like you, Bangladesh. We like you, Saudi Arabia. We love all you wonderful countries out there. However, we have an issue with China. China is trying to, they don't follow the World Trade Agreement. They steal intellectual property. They disrupt supply chains. They're being aggressive towards Taiwan. They're doing all of these things that we don't like. They fund the wrong sides of all the wars. They're our ideological enemy. Vietnam, we would really like you to be our friend. But unfortunately, in this one area, the friend of my enemy isn't my friend. They're my enemy. So here's what we need you to do. We're willing to go tariff 0% with Vietnam, or maybe we'll say 3%, 5%, whatever it is that needs to be. But you say, Vietnam, we'll go 5% with you. We'll go 5% tariffs on Vietnamese goods, which is lower than everyone else in the rest of the world except our friends. And we say, if you get to the net zero tariffs, that's great, Vietnam. But in order to do that, you have to stop giving money to China. You have to stop buying. You have to tariff China in response because we'll give you access. We'll have a 0% import tariff from Vietnam, but you have to tariff China. You can't be buying Chinese goods because then we're just buying Chinese goods through you, and we don't want that in the United States because China is our enemy. The Chinese government is bad, evil, and a force for bad and evil in the world, and we can't just buy things from them through you. So if you want to be our friend, you have to do that. And you go to every country in the world and you make that deal because you say, listen, we want to be friends with everybody. It's nice. We want to be the global hegemon. We want to be the leaders of the world. We want to exert our influence. And right now is the time with these tariffs, you can do it. You can force other countries, one, to lower their tariffs against the U.S. so that theoretically we can export more goods. But two, you can use other countries that are under our umbrella of protection, our umbrella of friendship, have access to the largest market in the world, which is the U.S. market. You can use this umbrella of American power and have other countries make a deal with you and say, listen, we like you, but you can't be dealing business with us and our enemies at the same time. You can't be buying oil from Iran. You can't be buying oil from Russia. You can't go and be friends with China and us. This is the split down the middle of the lunchroom, and you have to decide whose table you're eating at. Because, listen, it's not that we're going to hold it against you. If you want to do business with those other people, you're allowed to. But you're not going to do business with us. And I think we should do that with every country. And you can still get a win out of there because we can start to really change how China's influence around the world is handled and measured and how much respect they command in the world. Because if we cripple their market, they don't have anything. Their country, their GDP in their country is still pathetically low. They're not a rich country. I know we like to pretend that they are, but there's 1 billion people who live in China, and their GDP is still bad. Most of their country still lives in poverty, and their government, while rich in some ways, is just not as rich as the United States. Not really. I know they own a lot of our debt, but they don't have the same kind of power that the United States has. And this is a time to flex that and show them. And maybe we can get China to make some concessions to the United States on things that we actually want from them. I don't know. It's just an idea. But one thing we can't do is move forward with this idea we're going to tariff everyone in the world and somehow we're going to make a bunch of money. I do not see that because countries they're going to start doing business with other places for their business. And again, you want access to the United States market, but if the United States, the idea of a tariff is not that people are not going to buy from other countries. That's what I'm saying. The idea is if we're importing $100 worth of things from Finland and we raise a tariff, well, are we still going to be importing the same amount? Because if you're trying to build business in the United States, the answer is no. We're going to import less from Finland. And we're going to start building things in the United States. Well, if that's the case, we're not going to make money from the taxes on the tariffs because we're importing less from Finland. So we're not going to make a bunch of revenue this way if we're trying to build manufacturing. If we're not trying to build manufacturing and the idea is that we're going to just import enough from Finland, well, then there's no American jobs that you're creating. So what is the point? And I guess you have to make your priorities clear. And my idea is that the priority should be to reorient global trade away from our enemies and towards the United States by making deals that lower tariffs around the world for our friends. I think that's the only way forward that makes any sense to me, but we'll see. We'll see what Donald Trump will do. Like I said, I'm rooting for him. Don't get me wrong. Everyone knows. I've made it very clear. I'm rooting for him. I want him to succeed. I think we're walking a tightrope right now, and I am nervous about where that tightrope, what happens when we wobble. Because if we wobble, we can straighten. You got the pole and you're balancing. You can straighten up. But sometimes you fall. And if we fall, maybe our tightrope winds up only being 5 feet above the ground and we bruise our hip. Or maybe we're walking over Niagara Falls and we go over the cliff and that's the last they ever hear of us. You never know, and I prefer not to find out. So anyway, enough with the doom and gloom. Let's end this with the most important topic of the day. Topic 3. 100 men versus 1 gorilla in a fight. Who wins? I don't know. Why am I bringing this up? Did you see it on the internet? It was everywhere on my social media feed. People were talking about it on Instagram and Facebook, and I saw simulations run in computer models of 100 people fighting a gorilla. And it's just, I don't know if everyone else went down the same weird algorithm train that I did this week, but this is a big topic. A couple people asked me about this through text message, so I know other people are seeing it. Could 100 men beat a gorilla in a fight? I went back and forth on this. I'll be honest. I went back and forth on this because I said yes immediately. I was like, yeah, I think so. I think 100 men could beat a gorilla in a fight. And then I said no. I said, you know what? I don't know. Because have you seen a gorilla? A gorilla's 400 to 500 pounds. They're giant freak animals, freaky strong, freaky fast. I watched a couple of videos of gorillas where they're fighting each other and they're running and they're ripping and they're throwing things around. And you say, man, those are big, powerful creatures. So I went yes. Then I went no. But I'm back to yes. And I'll tell you why. Because I watched, again, I don't know why. It was only a minute, so it's not like I wasted a bunch of time on this. But I saw a video of a man who, I don't know what his title is, but he's a gorilla expert. He had skeletons of gorillas in his background. He had a bunch of gorilla books and things. This guy, he said, listen, here's the fact. He said, look at this gorilla skull. And he held up this replica gorilla skull, and it's gigantic. And you say, people look at this, and they say, yeah, a gorilla would win in a fight because look at it. He said, but as a 400 to 500 pound creature, he said, you can't get 100 men around a gorilla. And that's true. I thought about this too, because you could have 5 or 6 people around the gorilla at any one particular moment. And you say the first 5 or 6 people who fight a gorilla, they're going to get mauled. They're going to get ripped to half. They're going to die. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be bloody. The problem for the gorilla is that human beings have stamina and we have numbers in that regard. And one thing about being 400 to 500 pounds, it takes a lot of energy to move. It takes a lot of energy to move quickly. It takes a lot of energy to utilize your strength. A gorilla is not that bright. It's not going to have the smartest way to conserve energy. It's not going to understand these things. So the idea is that at a certain point, that gorilla is exhausted. And it's not going to be able to rip through 100 people the way that you think it's going to rip through one person. And I think once the gorilla gets tired, I think that people are going to be able to kill it. I think so. I don't know. But I might be crazy. I could be totally wrong. I'm sure many people in the comments are going to tell me that. But I just see it. I think all it takes is for that gorilla to slow down just enough. It'd be tired. huffing and puffing, and it's ripped apart 20 to 30 people, and you got 70 more people to get through. Listen, I don't know how many 4-year-olds I could beat in a fight. 5-year-olds. I don't know how many 5-year-olds I could beat in a fight. Probably a lot. But what if I had to fight 1 million? Do you think 1 million could ever overpower me? Eventually, you just get tired. You just get worn out. There's a number where I just can't physically fight that many people because I'm so exhausted, you just collapse. A gorilla isn't a human. They don't have the same kind of lungs, endurance, and stamina that a human has. I think it's going to get tired. I think it's going to collapse. I think eventually you just walk on it. And it's like, most human beings. How many 10-year-olds could you fight? It's like, I fight 10-year-olds all day. You can't. You get tired. Have you ever tried to do anything all day just for 24 hours straight? You ever tried to walk for 1 day straight? It's impossible. You can't do it. Eventually you collapse. And I think 100 people may run into a problem with the gorilla's endurance and stamina. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. It's a nonsense topic, but it was pretty entertaining to think about this week and to just hear a bunch of people's different takes. And then how does the equation change if instead of 100 regular people, it's 100 George St. Pierre's or 100 Francis Ngannou's or whatever the case may be? It changes. 100 Tim Kennedys. You don't know. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, I want to hear what you have to say. Who'd win? 1 gorilla or 100 men? But that's it. That's all I got to say. I'm going to end it there for the week. As always, I hope you guys enjoy it. Leave questions, comments, concerns down below, and I will catch you next Friday.